Yes, so here's the third part of the Dubai story. This is a short one, really. But basically, it was mainly about Pakistan. We had a very interesting visit to Pakistan in 1988. And uh, this was to visit a friend of mine, Muzaffar, who had been a student in Belfast some years previously while I was teaching at Methodist College. And he had given us an open invitation, really, to go to Pakistan. So I actually invited myself there. And yes, he was pleased to receive us. And yeah, I was certainly very excited by the prospect of going to Pakistan. Anyway, we arrived, Maria, myself, and my eldest son, Roger, who was only about 3 at the time. We arrived in Islamabad and we were taken to his house on the university campus to meet his wife. And it became clear immediately that there was some sort of political crisis going on concerning Kashmir and Afghanistan, which were very close by. We were close to the border, and of course, in those days, Afghanistan was occupied by the Russians, by the Soviet Russians. This was before the Berlin Wall had come down and everything. This was the old Soviet Empire. So it was not far away, the Russians, and all the fighting was going on there. So it became clear anyway, pretty quickly, that there was a security problem. Muzaffar was tense. And one afternoon early in the visit, I was awakened from my siesta by a loud noise which sounded like metal on earth. And I thought, what's that? Not heard that before. Metal on stone. Well, it turned out to be shells from an exploding ammunition dump which had been blown up by goodness knows who. But it was very scary because, well, first of all, I thought the Russians were coming. This was the Cold War. But it was not. It was the ammunition dump. But the shells continued to explode for about 20 to 30 minutes. I looked out the window on the university campus and there were spot fires everywhere from these hot metal from these exploding shells. Caused by the grass catching fire. It was really quite scary, and at one point the shells rained down on us and we had to hide under the kitchen table and even under the stairs, where we have a photograph of Maria and Roger under the stairs with cotton wool in their ears. Now, Muzaffar, who had been tense from the time of our arrival, was made even more nervous by this explosion. It wasn't a small explosion. In fact, it came out in the Western press, including the British Sunday Times, as a very large explosion which had killed 1,000 people. Now, we were 2 kilometers away. So I suppose we were lucky, is all you can say. And poor Muzaffar really was quite tense now because it became obvious that his association with us as Westerners could have been misinterpreted by certain extreme Islamic Pakistani elements as him being too friendly with Westerners. And I was pretty unaware of all the politics. I don't really understand that. I always considered myself to be pretty politically savvy in the geopolitical sense, in a sort of a very amateurish way. But I had definitely underestimated this situation. Certainly not anticipated it. I think Muzaffar felt obliged to receive us in the end out of his sense of hospitality. You know, all Muslims are very hospitable people. But he was clearly tense after this incident. And I suppose we were somewhat relieved. He looked after us very well, and his wife looked after us very well. But we were somewhat relieved to go back to Dubai after the 10 days. I later heard that, of course, Mum was very upset because she read all the headlines in the newspapers and knew we were in Islamabad. Anyway, after that, we lost touch with Muzaffar. He's one of friends of mine, a really good friendship with him, but that just slowly dissolved away because one of the two friends doesn't bother putting any effort into it. And in this case, Muzaffar didn't do that. He just stopped after this. I'm sure he had very good reasons for it. But, you know, uh, I've said many places before that friendship is like, um, for me, it's a very delicate plant and it has to be watered continuously. If you don't water it, it will die. And it doesn't stay alive for very long unless it's nourished. And I don't think it can be stopped and started. I've had this discussion with many friends and former friends about, oh yes, I can, you know, turn friendship on and off like a tap. No, you can't do that. You can go back to some form of friendship, but it's a very shallow, superficial friendship. If you want to maintain your friendship, you have to keep nourishing it. So in this case, we never heard from Muzaffar again. So that's the end of the friendship. And I was very sad about that. He had been a good friend, and you know, when we were in Ireland together, he'd visited us for Christmas and done all sorts of things. Anyway, second year was very good, and of course Sergi was born, and we went back again to Belfast, and we rented a house close to Mum and Dad, and again it was very satisfactory. We got on well with each other, we gave each other space, and I remember taking young Roger out to watch the roadworks every day outside the house where we were. I don't know whether that got Roger his interest in construction or not. In the third year, again, it was a very good social year for us. One of the best, I'd say. Mum and Dad came and visited us again. They loved Dubai. They loved the barbecues and the sunny days on the beach and so on. However, at work, the drip, the poodle, was looking for an opportunity to get rid of me. I knew that I was a target ever since he got rid of Jerry because I was a friend of Jerry. And it was a very small little community. Everybody knew that. I sat beside him at lunch. That was a criminal offense. And that's one of the things I really hated about that school. Because when Jerry became a target with that awful woman who was the headmistress, then anyone who was his friend was obviously the next one to be eliminated. That's the mentality of the conservative mindset. So I was waiting for something to happen almost in a way. But it happened. And in this form is a story. Here's the story. I had a lower sixth A-level biology group of 4 boys. And they were very weak. And this was the first cohort. And often the first cohort is weak with a new program. And especially with the type of students we had. So they were not at all suitable for A-level biology. They were just there to keep them in the school and to keep them off the streets, basically. So yes, we had nice facilities and everything, and yeah, we all went along. We paid lip service to this A-level biology. But I knew they weren't going to get the required grades, and I knew that at the end, someone would be held accountable for all this money being spent, and I knew that it would be the teachers. So I knew I would also be a target. Anyway, so what happened was one day, the drip, the stooge, called me into his office, and I always thought, that's always a bad sign. He never ever spoke to me, so I knew there was something up. And he said, He'd noticed that one of my students had injured himself in a practical experiment, calculating the heat of combustion of peanuts. Well, yes, the silly boy had been fiddling around and joking. He had, a very immature boy and playing around with the thing with burning oil. So he had a couple of spits of oil on his finger or something. But it wasn't a serious incident at all. Anyway, he must have told the story to the poodle. The poodle probably asked him or something, I don't know. Anyway, the poodle says to me, what safety procedures and precautions had I followed? And I thought, what a fatuous question. I mean, I was an experienced teacher. Of course, I'd followed safety procedures and precautions, with the masks and all that and so on. So I knew what was coming next. Can I see your teaching notes and schemes of work? All that stuff which no one ever did in those days. In those days, there weren't such things, and they were not required, and he'd not required them of us or anything like that. But that didn't matter. This was a private fiefdom, and he could do what he liked. So I knew what he wanted. He wanted me out. And to be honest, it was the end of the third year, and I just thought, how long is this going to go on for? He's going to wait for something else, or find some reason not to renew my contract. So I had a choice of either waiting for a couple of months when my contract renewal came up, in which case he could get rid of me using that as an excuse, and I would have a bad reference and I would get no money. Or I could negotiate with him and I knew plenty of money, get a good severance pay, as it were, and then he would give me a good reference, and then at the end of the year, nobody would be any the wiser, and I would have a little bit more money to look after the family. So I decided to negotiate with them, and we went through a farcical negotiation and a farcical politeness when I knew exactly what he was doing. I knew there was no future in school for me. Anyway, so it was a major shock for the family again to have to leave. And it was complicated by the fact that we had a friend with us at the time, because this all happened pretty close to the end of the year, although not exactly. And this friend was from Kuwait, actually, and he was the headmaster of the school there, and he was staying with us. And while I was negotiating my departure, Saddam Hussein was threatening to invade Kuwait, and my friend was getting very, very nervous. Anyway, we all ended up, the friend and all, going home to Ireland. The next day, after we arrived in Ireland, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, occupied my friend's school, and my friend never really worked again full-time, basically. It was a very sad story for him. And that's the way it happened. That's the Middle East for you. So we all ended. It all ended very abruptly. But Mum and Dad had visited us twice, and I was very happy with that, and they were very happy with that. But I was very unhappy because I had been unable to interest my brothers in a visit who I'd visited, who I'd invited on more than one occasion. So anyway, we packed up and left Dubai for good, leaving our friends Len behind. And it was the day after our departure, as I said, Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq. It was June 1990.